Welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. It is November 3rd. It's already late, or late for me. It's 8 o'clock, and I realized I still hadn't filmed for you guys my October wrap-up. So for my October wrap-up, I actually read 6 books this month. 3 are fiction and 3 are nonfiction. So let's start with the fiction. These are 3 different books that I have had for different amounts of time, I would say, on that fiction foodie TBR of mine. The first is My Year of Meats by Ruth Ozeki. This I have had on my shelves for quite a while. I actually tried to start reading this in June and ended up putting the book down. This is a debut novel. Yeah, this is her debut novel, and this follows 2 different women. We shift perspectives back and forth. So Jane Takagi Little lands a job producing My American Wife. This is a TV series that shows American women cooking different cuts of meat, and the intended audience are the housewives back in Japan. It's sponsored by a big meat exporting company, and through her interviewing, she starts to learn about the hormone DES and how it's used in the United States in our cows, and the negative effect those hormones are having on women, children, and people in the United States. Meanwhile, we flip perspectives to Akiko Ueno, who is the Japanese housewife who is trying to conceive and is having problems conceiving. Her husband works for the big meat company that is sponsoring My American Wife. So we flip back and forth between these 2 perspectives. I really liked this book. I'm not quite sure why it took me so long to pick it up the first time. I was traveling at mid-October. I had a 3-hour layover in an airport. This was a great read for me. I liked the different perspectives. As someone who has read about the meatpacking industry and some of the terrible treatment of animals, I think when this came out, this would have been way more, not even controversial, maybe expose is the word I'm thinking of, like really bringing to light some of these terrors. But now that this book is probably about 10 years old, so some of the things that Jane learns as a producer are not as groundbreaking. One of the common themes, though, between the 2 women is the idea of women and childbearing. So Jane is this producer. She's living in hotels on the road, and she does not want a partner. She saw her mother and father and their marriage fall apart. So she doesn't want children, but she does have a gentleman caller who she meets up with at various hotel stops along the way, and later finds herself about halfway through the book pregnant. Meanwhile, Akiko back in Japan, who is watching the My American Wife show, and as one of those kinds of viewers who reviews the show, she is one of the test audience viewing the show and providing feedback each week. She doesn't want to conceive. She feels very pressured by her husband to have a child, and she is so anemic that her period has stopped. She has stopped menstruating, and the doctors all want her to eat meat, and red meat specifically. The more she eats red meat, the more she is vomiting and binge eating. It's a very abusive relationship. And eventually these 2 women do cross paths, and I won't spoil all of the ending in the wrap-up, but it is a wonderful book, and I'm very excited to read more of Ruth Ozeki's work. It did take me a long time to pick it up, but I guess I just wasn't in the right mindset, and this time I was, and I'm so glad I read it. Next up, we have Natalie Tan's book of Luck and Fortune by Roselle Lim. I mentioned this in, I think, my birthday wish list, or one of my other wrap-ups or book hauls this month. This book I read, it is all about Natalie Tan. Her mother has died, so she's returned home to this little Chinatown in San Francisco's little Chinatown. And all that she remembers about that city and little Chinatown was how excited she was to get out. Her mother was a shut-in. She did not leave the home, and she really resented her neighborhood and her neighbors for making her pretty much grow up at a very young age to take care of her mother. But now that she's back, the restaurant downstairs that belonged to her grandmother has actually been left to her, and she's trying to figure out how to bring that back together. In terms of her own career, Natalie has jumped from job to job. She wants a career as a chef. She and her mother had left on bad terms, so she has a little bit of guilt coming back. She's also not sure what she wants to do with her life. The neighborhood seer reads the restaurant's fortune in the leaves, like tea leaves. And Natalie learns that she must cook 3 recipes from her grandmother's cookbook to aid the struggling neighbors before the restaurant will succeed. What exactly that means, you see throughout the book. I don't want to spoil too much. It's definitely a little bit of magical realism, definitely fiction, but I loved learning about all of these different dishes, and it was a lot of fun. I actually have Roselle Kim's new book on my other shelf, which is all about tea, a tea shop in London. Next up on the list, we actually have The Dating Dare by J.C. Lee. This is the second in the Sweet Mess series by J.C. Lee. I have a whole separate review about this book. I plan on reviewing more food fiction books in the future. They start off as Patreon exclusives, and then they will be released large distribution or viewership on my YouTube channel, whatever the fancy word is. So this is it's these food fiction book reviews are starting out as Patreon exclusives. This was the first one in that series. I'm calling them coffee chats because I'm trying to keep them short and sweet, like we're having a cup of coffee and talking about a good book. So The Dating Dare is about Tara and Seth. Tara's best friend just got married, and her best friend's new brother-in-law, Seth, is only in town for a month before he leaves to start a new job in Paris. The two together start the dating dare. They have 3 dates together, no strings attached. Tara's connection to food is that she owns a local brewery. She is the brew master. Seth is a fashion photographer, a little bit of a bad boy reputation. This wasn't my favorite book. If I did a star rating system, which I don't, it'd be like a 3. It's very middle of the road. There's more detail in that full review, which should be released to my main channel after you see this wrap up. So if you want more details about the book, go for it. I think that maybe if I had read the first book, A Sweet Mess, I might appreciate some of the more context in it, but it felt a little bit expository detail. And I wanted more about the bar. I wanted more about her brewmaster stuff. Okay, those were the 3 fiction books I read this month in October. So let's move over into nonfiction. The first nonfiction book I read this month is Conscious Capitalism. Has nothing to do with food, but it's the idea of liberating the heroic spirit of business. And it's written by John Mackey, the co-CEO of Whole Foods, and Raj Sisodia. This was definitely a business book, very dry. Not the most interesting thing in the world. I think as someone who's gone to business school, I've gotten my MBA, I own a small business. This stuff was nothing new, but when it came out, I could see why this was a huge deal. This has sold many, many copies. This is a new version with more of an author's note in the upfront, a preface, And it's the idea of doing good in your business and what that can mean. As someone who runs a small business with a donation component, Read It and Eat actively donates $5 from every purchase to help fight hunger. I believe in doing good by fighting hunger. I appreciated this book. I think it's a great read if you want to understand how to be a better leader in the business area, how to inspire people and do good for the environment, for yourself, for your employees, and for everyone around you. But not a food book, so not something I'm probably going to take away and remember the rest of my life, quite honestly. Next up, I read Judith Jones' memoir, My Life in Food. You should recognize this one because I unwrapped it for the month of October. The other book for the month of October, I'll be entirely honest, I unwrapped 97 Orchard, and I had a used copy, and when I opened it up, the book was underlined, highlighted, and tagged. I know some people enjoy that, but as someone who's reading the book, reading someone else's tags and underlining was very distracting. I couldn't flow with the story because I was reading all the notes on the side that's like, this is an example of the immigration story, and an example of this, an example of that. It was very distracting. So I actually ordered a new copy of that book. I put the original 97 Orchard that I had in my little free library outside. So, it is what it is. I'm going to try and read that in November since it is also nonfiction November. But sorry, back to the original book. This book is The 10th Muse, My Life in Food by Judith Jones. And Judith Jones is a legendary food editor. She is well known for being the person who discovered Julia Child and mastering the art of French cooking and editing that book and bringing it to publication. She worked with tons of other chefs and cookbook writers throughout her career. And for me, that was really exciting to learn about how Judith Jones just kind of had a natural knack to find people who not only had culinary prowess, but had this inner thing, this special thing that made them easily relatable. Oftentimes, the people that Judith Jones worked with were people who were trying to recapture these childhood feel-good moments in their food, things of their culture, things of their past, reconnecting with family. And she has a lovely writing style. It's really interesting who she meets and her relationships throughout her life. And I couldn't imagine being a kid and just taking a class in France and then writing letters to your mother and just being like, I'm not coming back. Things are gonna be great. I'm staying here. I have no idea how she ever pulled that off. But it was a delightful read. It was on the shorter side and I flew through it. 10 wonderful chapters, and I really recommend this if you are a fan of cookbooks and the history and universe of cookbooks in general. And the last book I read this month, transparently it is November 3rd and I'm still not entirely done with this because I'm listening to the audiobook. It is the Book of Eels, Our Enduring Fascination. Oh, sorry, book. The Book of Eels, Our Enduring Fascination with the Most Mysterious Creature of the Natural World by Patrick Sevenson. It's an international bestseller. I got this used from Open Books for $10 and I am listening to it, and this is a very weird book. It kind of reminds me of the memoir Why Fish Don't Exist. You think the book's gonna be about eels, but no, the book is very weird. It references, like, did you know that Freud, before he became the Sigmund Freud we all know, he wanted to go to school to study eels, specifically eels, and he couldn't make any progress in it, so he kind of had a mental breakdown. Then it went into this like woman-hating mode, and then became the Freud we all know and did all of his revolutionary research. It was very strange. And then in another section of the book, they're talking about eels in literature, and I told this story to Dan earlier, but I'm in this part of the book where they're talking about this story of a pregnant woman walking along the cliff edges of the sea with her husband, and she meets a fisherman who's fishing, and they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he reels in his line, and it's a horse head in the water because the eels are attracted to the flesh of the horse, because apparently eels can also eat human flesh. And then the book goes into great detail describing this crazy loony fisherman pulling the fat eels out of the horse's ears, and they're covered in the goo of the brain. And the wife in the story, who's pregnant, immediately starts like vomiting and is petrified for very obvious reasons. And then she becomes very anemic, and then the only thing she can eat is eels, and then goes on this eel binge, and all she eats is eels while she's pregnant, and then she dies with an eel in her. Yeah, it's that weird. So I'm like hesitating to finish this book. I have like an hour and a half left of the audiobook. I am gonna finish it tomorrow. I have a nice break during the middle of my day. Maybe during my lunch hour, I will listen to it. There are definitely things that are fascinating about the eels, such as their reproductive tendencies. Essentially, they don't like to have offspring. And then out of the blue, they suddenly leave the rivers, return to the ocean, turn on something in them that makes all of their genitals appear, they have offspring, and then they vanish. Like, it took scientists like centuries, I'm not kidding, centuries, to find a living male eel with reproductive organs. So at one point they thought that, originally in the history books, they thought eels spontaneously produced offspring. Like spontaneous combustion, they just spawned. Like, that is what people thought because they could not find any like scientific research on it. That would also be terrifying if you were like, hello, eel, and then you looked away and you came back and the eel had produced another eel. That's kind of terrifying. I would love to see if Olive, over at a Book Olive, had read this, or if the Book Bully had read this. This is definitely more in the nature and environmental science space versus strictly food writing. Obviously, those sections intersect. But this is weird, and I just need to talk to somebody about it who's read this in case I'm missing some greater, dramatic, impactful thing. This is the cover is beautiful, but this is a very strange book. Okay, so those are the 6 books I read in the month of October. Have you decided to participate in Nonfiction November? I already have my Nonfiction November TBR up. I'll link it in the cards and down below. Nonfiction November is like my Super Bowl. I'm so excited to be a part of it. I'm already about halfway through Stanley Tucci's memoir called Taste, which, if you love Stanley Tucci, listen to the audiobook because Stanley Tucci narrates it and it's wonderful. But let me know in the comments below, do any of these 6 books seem interesting to you? What do you think about the Coffee Chat series? Are you petrified of eels now? I don't know if I'll ever get the idea of a horse head on a fishing line out of my brain and eels coming out of its ears. It's quite terrifying. But don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm ending on a creepy note. Goodbye.